Thanks, Tamsin. I can't really see many of you, but thank you for being here. I'm excited to be here. I want to apologize, first of all, for my, as you'll see, my PowerPoint or slide skills are not the best. I'm an accountant, so please keep that in mind as you judge my less great presentation slides. So yeah, I graduated from Evergreen, worked at the Flaming Eggplant, was on the board of the Olympia Food Co-op for about 5 years, was one of the founders of the new Moon Cooperative Cafe and the Northwest Construction Cooperative, all in Olympia. And when I moved back to Spokane, I met up with these folks here who started a worker co-op, and eventually kind of moved over here towards the end of last year. Spokane Workers Cooperative is a little bit different than the other co-ops like in Olympia. The co-ops in Olympia are individual worker co-ops where they have a group of worker owners that are independent of each other, each one. Olympia Food Co-op is a consumer co-op. Here we are a holding company that owns other businesses, and then the members or the workers of those businesses are members of the holding company. And so we actually have 5 different businesses, 6 different sets of operations that all work under one cooperative company. So it's pretty cool, but it is a little more complicated. Which leads me to my topic, which is why I was a little bit reactively chose the importance of sound business practices in a worker cooperative, and I'll talk about why I, think that's even something that has to be said. But I need to share my presentation, don't I? Okay. Well, for those who are new to co-ops, a co-op is a business that is made up of its owners and its users and those who benefit from the co-op are the people who make it up. Sorry, it's like you would have a traditional company. The owners may not be the people who work there, or may not be the people who shop there, and it's intended to be to have a positive social impact. Co-ops are defined by their membership, so you can have a consumer co-op, or you can have a marketing co-op, or you can have a worker co-op, producer co-op. A worker co-op is the members of the co-op are employees. The workers are at the same time employees, the investors, and the owners. And so the workers generally have an equal share in the co-op, and either sit on the board of directors or elect their representatives on the board of directors. And they also share in the profit from the company. People choose a co-op instead of something else. You ask, why would you do that besides, creating an LLC, or what if you sole proprietorship? And it's a good question. And oftentimes it's for different reasons. It could be shared responsibility. Maybe you don't want to start a business just yourself, and maybe not just one other person. I also like the ability to co-create with others. I like working with others, and I like having peers that are more or less at my level in terms of responsibility and benefit. And for a co-op, you also get to share in the profits with those who produce the profits, and especially in a worker co-op. You also have an opportunity to be part of a democratic and participatory workplace. The difference is that I would say the importance of sound business practices in a worker cooperative, of course, those are also important in any business. Why I think it's especially important in a worker cooperative is because democracy requires additional time and energy. It takes a lot of work, and it requires energy for communication, You need to allow for disagreement. You need to think about education, and there's going to be more process. You know, a sole proprietor or a small business owner, or even a medium or large business owner, they could make decisions, and they're not accountable to everyone in the same way that you may be in a cooperative. They can make that decision. They don't have to communicate it. They don't have to get buy-in. Now, that's not always a good idea, and a lot of people still do that, even not in a co-op. But it is important when you work at a democratic organization to do it. And then the other question is, what do I mean by sound when I say the importance of sound business practices? Obviously, that's kind of a loaded qualifier. But I would say that sound means it aligns with your values and your mission. It's legal and ethical, and also it is effective. And I would emphasize effective at achieving your goals, which are your values and your mission as well. But your business goals are also important. And so when talking, and it's hard because I'm trying to straddle this line between, you know, talking about non-cooperatives, but in my space, obviously, I've spent a lot of time just working in worker cooperatives. And I think in that space, there is an emphasis on doing things differently, which is important, right? Because we're creating organizations that we want to see have a positive impact on our communities, on ourselves, for our coworkers. However, sometimes I think it is lost that we emphasize so much the difference about what we're doing, how it's different than other companies or other businesses, but I don't want that to come at the cost of ignoring what's required to actually deliver on that difference. So sometimes the emphasis of, you can say it about, you know, if you have a more positive ecological impact mission, and you're running a business that's going to have a good impact on the environment, or at least a less negative impact. You can't, it's easy sometimes to feel okay to dismiss, like, well, we're doing this really awesome thing, so we don't have to worry about all that other stuff. And I'm here to say, I have learned the wrong way. It is all important. And it is more important to assume that if there's a reason that people do it, we should understand what that reason is and not just write it off as, you know, maybe not within our values or within our mission, because there may be other complicating factors to that. And I'll explain what I mean. So in a worker co-op, some of the challenges that democratic companies face is, as well as any company, but what I think is especially important in a worker cooperative is clarity in the division of responsibilities. And most notably in governance and management. So governance in a worker co-op or in a cooperative in general is either your members, which is all the owners, or the board of directors, which is elected representatives from the members. They should be setting, I believe, the vision, the goals, and the strategy of the company. And then there is generally then management, who is the execution of the vision to reaching those goals directed by a strategy. There can be a lot of issues when management starts deciding what the vision, goals, and strategy of the company should be, or vice versa. Board of directors or just members independently are trying to decide exactly how to do those things and kind of micromanage. It can create a lot of extra work and a lot of confusion. So it is important to understand these two elements and to understand who's responsible for what, when, and how. The money stuff. I'm realizing I don't have any notes for this because I think I can just talk through it. But a lot of business and small businesses as well, it can be, I think, overwhelming and intimidating to engage with the accounting and finance piece of a business. So it is helpful to, hire a bookkeeper or an accountant, but even then, it's very important to understand the impact and importance of it. Having good accounting, reporting, and financial management is essential, and especially essential in a democratic organization, because if you expect the membership and those they elect to sit on the board of directors who are supposed to oversee the management of the company, if you expect them to be able to do their job, then you need to have quality information. And that starts with the most boring, tedious part, which is the accounting itself. And it has to be detailed, and it has to be patient, and it has to produce quality information, because you can have financial reports all you want. People can look at their bank account and make guesses, but if the information isn't actually done well, then they may be making decisions based off of bad information, or at least unclear and undetailed information. So the first part is to make sure that you're paying attention to the accounting, to the bookkeeping, and that reporting is being done, and not just lists. You may, I mean, I don't know what experience you all have in business, or seeing financial statements, but a lot of times there are long strings of numbers, and you're kind of just expected to know. You're like, okay, well, QuickBooks says this is my report. They need to be useful and dynamic, so that way, in a democratic organization, people aren't always coming from that background. Typically, they're not, and they're trying to understand the problems and opportunities that the company faces. So I think they should create colorful, visual, useful reports that show things and trends and comparisons. And they should be dynamic, meaning not, okay, here's your report pack. Let me know if you have any questions. Let's talk next month. But hey, let's go over this together. Do you have a question about sales? Okay, let's dig in there some more. Let's do a little bit of analysis together. And then the financial management piece, because there's the producing the quality information, there's making the report so you can make sense of it, which is the analysis part, and then the actual making the decisions based off of the analysis of the information. Active financial management, which is essential. For example, you see that a certain revenue line, say you are a retail store and you sell mostly two things. If you sell mostly books, and then you have a coffee shop in there, and you see that coffee shop sales have been declining over many, many months, and book sales have been going up, that tells you something. And then the financial management piece is saying like, okay, well, do we need to do something about these coffee sales? Or is it okay because it's actually just helping people stay in our bookstore and buy books, and we're just kind of losing money in coffee? That's okay because we're making it on books, and there's a difference. Or like it offsets each other. Or should we consider shutting down the coffee part and just selling books? So you're making proactive decisions with that information on a regular basis. Maybe I'll go back to your list here. Also, I'm just trying to kill time because I'm going to finish really fast. So where did I didn't list it. Anyways, yep, here we are. Proactive. I think the last piece is I've talked about governance and management, knowing the difference between those and having a clear division of roles. Understanding and using what you create to make decisions, understanding the financial information and making financial decisions with it. And then proactive and comprehensive management. So the sound business practice in a co-op is one, I think it is easy to blend these two things in a small worker co-op, especially not understand the difference, to not see how important this part is and kind of breeze past it. You might get reports, you may just be doing your due diligence, or you may just like not have the capacity or the qualified staff doing the accounting. And so the information maybe doesn't get finished on a regular basis, or you get reports like a lot of small business owners do from their bookkeeper or whatever, and you don't know exactly how to use it. And the third piece, I think, is the management piece. So not only understanding the difference between governance and management, but also understanding what management should be doing. And that means being proactive and active management, and also comprehensive. So, we all, those of us who end up in management roles, we come from a specific background. So mine is accounting and business administration, but those aren't the only pieces of managing a business, right? There's accounting, business administration, financial management, personnel, operations, resource management. Depending on the industry, those are more or less important. And a manager should be planning things, organizing, motivating people. In a democratic organization or business, this is most effectively and most justly done with systems, process, and procedure created with the input from relevant parties. So a sole proprietor with a small business can kind of just wing it sometimes, hiring, firing, giving people, the way that raises work and pay structures work in small businesses are, often kind of willy-nilly, a little bit like on the fly. And not that people mean any harm, but it doesn't create the most equitable circumstances for people. And if we want to have an impact in our companies, and if we want to scale cooperatives and worker cooperatives specifically, I think we have to understand the importance of, one, having all of the elements of management covered by qualified people and or consultants that are helping us do a better job. But also doing those things with systems, with process, with procedure that we've created with our board, with our membership when we should, and with staff in general. And it is easy to get caught reacting to things, one crisis to another, and you get caught in a crisis cycle. And I think the worst thing a manager could do is get caught in a crisis cycle. You need to take the crisis, find the opportunity to create a comprehensive way out of it so you can move forward with being able to look ahead. I can't emphasize enough how different it feels to be stuck in a reactive situation trying to manage a business versus seeing 2 weeks, 3 months, 6 months ahead. You can see a problem coming. And I want to encourage you all to know that it's very possible to see a problem coming, and that we are in control of our own destiny in that sense of not getting stuck in a reactive cycle most of the time. But it is very easy to do so. That's really the end of my piece, unless people want me to talk more.
Awesome. Well, this is fantastic, Michael. I wonder if you would be okay if we opened up the floor for questions.
That'd be awesome.
I will invite folks to raise their hands or put their questions in the chat. The students who are enrolled in my class, this is your chance to ask your questions. I have a list of all the questions that my students submitted, so I can also be the one to pose those or speak those aloud if need be. But I'm going to pause and see if anyone has a burning question before I maybe bring some of those questions to the floor.
Well, it depends on what kind of cooperative experience you want. Are you looking for like a bigger, more conventional co-op experience, or an employee ownership experience, or more of a homegrown radical? I don't know. It depends on small, because you can work at an REI. Mm-hmm. You can, experience employee ownership through Winco Foods, or you can work at an ag co-op, or a consumer co-op, or the Olympia Food Co-op, which is kind of a blend between worker co-op and consumer co-op. So it depends on what you're looking for. Well, I think it's helpful to start on the ground floor. I think it's helpful to just, if you're used to grocery stores, you're working the floor or cashier, or whatever, I think it's helpful to get started there and then find opportunity to take on more responsibility and all that. Yeah. I wouldn't suggest just starting one on your own with no experience with that. I don't think that's where you're going, but some of us have chosen that route and it's not the best idea, I don't think. I think I would preface it with saying that there is a question about structure as well as a question of composition in that case. So you can have the qualities of a good manager. I think is someone who understands consultation, is a good listener. They can listen to hear what people's problems are, and come up with potential solutions. But they're not just doing, I think on one side, they're not just doing what someone said they need, but actually assessing the situation and seeing what they may actually need and seeing the individual's problem and trying to apply it maybe more holistically. So if someone's like, look, I can't work weekends or whatever, I have this, so we should just close for the weekends. And you're like, okay, well, this is an individual problem. Like maybe we just need better PTO so this person can take that time off because they have like a family obligation during that time. So I think that's one thing. And also it is important to understand that if someone is saying no, they do need to do that. They need to do that with care and with empathy, but also, yes, balance the whole of the company. But they also need to be empowered by the structure of the company to make those decisions. And I find a lot of times in co-ops, the problem is not that you don't have good managers, it's that the co-op structure and the co-op as a whole doesn't allow those managers to actually do their job.
I'm going to ask a follow-up to that, sort of a follow-up, because that's one of the student questions that was submitted. So can you talk a little bit more about how a cooperative balances democratic decision-making with efficient operations?
How does it ideally balance that? I think with delegation, autonomy, and I think it all comes down to clear division of roles and responsibilities. If everyone wants to have their fingers in everything, that is like the perfect recipe for burnout, consternation, and just like an energy suck. So how you balance it is by understanding when things are your responsibility and your job and when they are not, and making sure that qualified people are in those roles. And probably a culture of understanding that we're not going to be everything as a co-op. We're not going to be able to save the planet, save every person that comes to work here, pay the best wages, offer the most high quality service. It's like you still have to make decisions about that make sure that you are efficient. I guess I'm trying to answer that question, Ken, but I'm sorry if I'm going a little bit off. How to be effective, how to balance democracy and the FPC. I think it's trust. It's a culture of trust and transparency. And maybe that sounds simple, but you got to let people do their job and you got to do yours.
Awesome, thanks. Rita, go ahead, and then I've got another question that I'll speak into the Zoomosphere after that.
Okay. Hi, Michael. It's nice to see you again. I remember you came and spoke to my Flaming Eggplant class a few years ago, and then one of my students interned with you too. It's nice to reconnect. And But I was just wondering, I know something you said before when you visited our class and spoke to our students was just like the difference with doing the accounting and financial management like in a cooperative business, but like so much of like the business schools and stuff like that, it's just they sort of teach accounting for like the kind of more conventional businesses. But I guess could you speak to maybe some of the differences that one could consider when thinking about like the financial management piece when it comes to cooperative?
It's a good question. I think at the most basic level, there's not a whole lot of difference until you get to be a mature organization. I think that's when you can add a lot more nuance. I think there's a lot of great people in the co-op accounting world trying to create like different metrics that measure like financial ways of measuring like co-op health and stuff like that. But I think most importantly, in the more like basic level, or where you would probably find yourself, any one of us who aren't like fancy big co-op people, in that the financial management piece, like making those financial decisions, that we kind of take other things into account with a lot of empathy, and we don't just look at, oh well, such and such thing doesn't make us money, so we got to cut it. More, we look at like, how does this impact the community? How does it make our work environment more comfortable for everybody? Yeah, I think that's it. Just understanding other impacts than just like, clearly, if it's just one owner or a couple owners, they're going to be like, well, yeah, but how do I maximize the amount of money I get? And as workers in the environment, you need those things too, and you can't leave it. So.
All right, next question. What do you think is the biggest hurdle in the day-to-day running of a worker co-op?
We live in a culture that doesn't prepare us for this kind of work environment always. And I think even in progressive spaces, you need to have patience and tolerance and empathy to step outside of yourself and understand your own places to improve on. And then professionally, that there just isn't a lot. There is a lot more resources out there now for worker co-ops in a way than it was when I started a little over 10 years ago. But it's still not, you could, if you start a small business, you can go to the Small Business Development Center and they'll help you out. And they've got decades of experience running small businesses or whatever. They hook you up with a pro forma and blah, 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 blah. And there's some of that for worker co-ops now, but there just isn't as much training or resources. And also we live our lives in a culture that kind of pushes us in a different direction outside of work. And then we get to work and we try and make it different. Those two things conflict often. So that's a challenge.
All right, next question in the chat. How would non-co-op businesses take on a co-op lens?
Well, I think in two ways. Co-ops look at their membership a lot and talk about them in terms of stakeholders, but I think that businesses can think of stakeholders that don't necessarily engage with the organization in a transactional way. So you can think of your community or your neighborhood, like if it's a downtown Olympia business, you think of downtown Olympia. How is the people of downtown Olympia a stakeholder in, how does my business impact that region, those people? I think that's on one side, thinking about your stakeholders and your impact. The second one would be, well, yeah, and also thinking of your customers as members, and they have a right to be there. They have a right to, for you to care about them as well as your employees. And the other side is probably the participatory management side. And I think I've seen a huge shift in that. But really looking at management practices and techniques that involve more transparency about how the business is doing financially, what people are paid, what the owner makes, how does it work, and whether or not that feels fair. Also, thinking about what kind of rights an employee has, beyond just like, oh, I'll fire you. And what kind of benefits are fair for those employees, and understanding that, yes, the work they do produces the profits, which the owner takes home. And getting their input on, hey, if I decided to throw 6 more racks in here, is it going to make it like terribly uncomfortable for you to move around on the floor? Instead of just doing stuff like that and not thinking about the impact on your employees, and not thinking that that's very important.
Micheal, we had quite a few questions. I had quite a few questions come in around the work that you do in the Spokane Workers Co-op, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the process of what you do. I had a question around how do you select businesses to buy and convert into worker-owned co-ops, etc.
Well, I'm fairly new, so I can say what I do here, and I started in November. Technically, I started to do 2 things. One, create an internal accounting department. So the company previously had a third-party co-op bookkeeper doing the books for all the businesses. And I came in to take those over and create our own accounting department internally as we grow, and to offer essentially accounting, bookkeeping, financial advisory services to our subsidiaries, and then also create a business out of it where we offer those services to external, mostly co-ops as well, in the area and outside of the area. So we created a way that, you know, we do weekly bookkeeping for these 5 companies and these other 6, but these other 6 pay us externally in a different way that other ones do. But we kind of have a system that we can do all of it. And it generates extra revenue, and pays for my position in a way too, and for the in-house bookkeeper. How we decide to acquire companies is a good question. I think we're still figuring that out. I think initially it was a big push because there was a lot of the same founders of some of these businesses, and or people in their circles that everyone kind of was like, hey, if we all work together, we could share, you know, economies of scale. We could have shared insurance, you know, we shared broker, shared administration, like, and kind of all of us don't feel like we want to do this on our own. And I think the founders didn't want to run businesses themselves. They didn't want to be business owners. They wanted to be business owners with other people. And then we made some acquisitions, a bakery that was for sale, and then an HVAC company / fireplace store, which also was for sale. I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure the thought process that went into purchasing those things, except for like, hey, we could turn them into worker co-ops. They're for sale, and they're profitable. So the intention is just to create more employee ownership in this city, in this area. And that seemed like a good way to do it. And it's a very co-op heavy place, actually. There's a huge history of cooperatives in the area. And so people are much more open to it in a way. Not like, oh, I love co-ops, but like, oh yeah, of course, whatever. It's just it's how all the grocery stores run or whatever. Way on or something, you know.
Can I ask a follow-up to that, Micheal? Do you does the organization that you work for, do they go out and look for potential acquisitions? Do you have a lot of business owners who are like retiring and want to sell their business approach you? How does that happen?
A little bit of that happens, and a little bit of, so we're a small city, big town, so people know people, and so and we're small, and if we do any more acquisitions in the near future, it'll be probably a business we know, and we know the people who owned it. One of our acquisitions, you know, when you purchase a business, you can do your due diligence, but sometimes you end up being lied to, or, you know, not have all the complete set of information, and you find yourself in a sticky spot. So it's a little bit more informal than that, but also we are a peer member of Seed Commons Cooperative, which is a national co-op of cooperative lenders. And so there's also this piece that we work as a Seed Commons peer where we do intake around people, whether or not they want to start a co-op or turn into a co-op. And then there's also the option of them becoming part of the holding company as well in that process.
Cool. Another question. On a more personal level, why did you decide co-ops were going to be sort of your life's work up to this point? What intrigued you about them so much?
Well, one, I think it was the only job I could get at the time. It was 2008, and I got a job at the Eggplant, and no one else was hiring me. I looked for a bunch of different jobs. And when I left, or sorry, not left, when I graduated, so I couldn't work there anymore. After actually working in a lot of cooperatives and studying it, at the time, I did Latin American history and Spanish language studies at Evergreen, and in traveling to South America, did a lot of visiting cooperatives and learning about them. And I think I got a job at a coffee shop in Olympia, the ones that are in the state buildings. And I went on tour after I had not worked there anymore, because I went through a week. I went through a week of training in which they don't pay you because they call it an internship. The owner's husband is a cop, so she's not going to get busted for some reason. Her dad owns all the buildings and she runs those coffee shops. And so I quit the job, didn't get paid for the week I worked. It was a terrible experience. And then when I was on tour, I got a call from, anyways, they accused me of breaking in and stealing from them. Turns out it was another employee who tried to blame it on me, and they had them on camera. But her husband also called and posed to be an L&I worker, trying to get me to say that I was making a claim against her. Anyways, terrible experience. And I was like, this sucks. I got a dishwashing job at New Moon before we converted into a worker co-op. I got a dishwashing job there, and he seemed like he wanted to sell, and I was like, all right, let's do this, because I don't want to have that experience like I had that coffee shop ever again. So I will do anything and everything to never have to like belittle myself for minimum wage and some tips ever again. It's not like I didn't know how to make coffee. And I guess I just stuck with it. That's the last actual job I was hired for was a dishwasher. Yeah.
All right. Next question. What opportunities do you see for the future growth and development of the co-op you work in?
I think right now what we're trying to understand is, one, we're kind of putting our structure together, how it works, like what kind of autonomy and levels of responsibility, like the overall co-op management has with the managers of each business. And we're trying to get a really solid structural foundation. We're trying to get our finances a little bit better and understand how to run kind of a balanced portfolio, I would say, because the intent is that some food service co-ops, the intention is that some businesses like food service or bookstores, they're kind of at a disadvantage. Those are low margin companies. Whereas, construction companies, things that work in the trades or professional services are very profitable. And so you have worker co-ops, disparate worker co-ops, working in food service, making a very low wage and not have access to a lot of benefits, where you have these other ones where it doesn't seem fair. And it seems like you would actually share in a lot of that. And that is the intention of what we're doing, is that we can create some solidarity, some kind of sharing of resources, economies of scale to improve everyone's life, no matter what kind of industry they work in. However, we need to make sure we have that balance. We have to have a profitable business with a not so profitable business. And I think we got too many not profitable enough businesses, and we need to fix that. Because that's what kind of sells in the co-op space. Someone's like, my business isn't doing so hot anymore. I guess I'll sell it to the employees. That's what happens a lot of time.
Next question. What challenges have you faced in promoting worker ownership?
Well, it's hard to compensate founders when a company wasn't started as a worker co-op. So I think in the trades space, especially, you have a lot of small trades like even a painter or someone started their own general contracting, but they're just like a one-person show, or they got a couple employees, and you're looking at making them part of the co-op, and they spend a lot of time and energy on it, and they want to get paid out, or they want to be compensated in some kind of way that's powerful, and they're not used to not being in control. So telling someone, like, even in a restaurant, if someone's burnt out and I'm like, well, okay, worker ownership could be a possibility, they're like, I don't know how that works. People are just going to stink it. They're going to do terrible, which is possible. So I think it is convincing people, one, that compensation isn't just financial. It's also about, they're not giving anything. It's not a charity project, but that also being part of a worker co-op is beneficial to them in non-financial ways. In that shared responsibility, shared rights kind of way. And then the other piece is not having a lot of good co-op examples where people didn't know, where people knew what they were doing and had a lot of success. Because I think we find a lot of examples where people are floundering, and why I chose this as my topic. I can't always point to something and say, look at how successful this is. So you should be a co-op.
I'm just going to keep asking my list of questions if there's no other hands raised or things coming through the chat. Next question. What advice would you give someone considering working in a worker co-op?
Get a regular job first. If you haven't had a regular job first, please get one of those. I think that a worker co-op is not perfect, and it's not a perfect job. And it's important that you have a contrast to that if you haven't. And I think that would be part of it. And then also just be open-minded to contributing. But also know that any business, it has its own culture, its own, people who've been there for a long time or not. And that one worker co-op isn't like every no worker co-op is the same. And so it shouldn't reflect on the model necessarily, whether or not one is awesome to work at or not. But that it's kind of a gamble also, just like any business or any organization made up of human beings. So should expect that. So I will explain maybe how, for me, what's most familiar is accounting. So if I'm taking on a new client, I do an assessment of kind of where they're at, what their needs are. We get a scope of work together. So, okay, we're going to do weekly data entry and bank reconciliation. We're going to do weekly accounts payable. We're going to do month-end close and reports. We're going to do excise tax. Now I'll do that myself initially, and in this role, then someone does work as the full-time bookkeeper and accountant, which I supervise, and she's amazing. But I don't hand stuff off to her until I've got all the information or as much of the information as I can think of that she needs to perform the work. So I guess it would be that I've collected everything in terms of like, okay, what are all the logins that she needs? What's all the context that she needs? Do I have access to the accounting system? Have I created the chart of accounts? So I guess a milestone, if I'm understanding your question for that, would be, you know, having a sense of what those finite responsibilities are and documenting them in a way that you can hand it to someone and they can use that on their own and just come to you with clarifying questions.
If there's no more questions, I'm just going to ask maybe one more, Michael, and then want to be respectful of your time. For all of us in the room, who some of us may know a lot about co-ops, some of us may know nothing about co-ops. If we want to learn more about co-ops in general, what's one thing we can do in the next week? One or two things.
What can you do in the next 2 weeks? I think, let me see here. There's a national organization called the National Cooperative Business Association, which is the national organization for all types of cooperatives, and they're out of DC. I'm wondering if you can find like the directory, just in resources. I would suggest going and looking at all the things that are actually cooperatives in this country. I think it is just the US. Because even though if you looked at, I mean, all the sole proprietorships in the US, would be like, oh, just 10 zillion more, but it's still like just a thing and a refresher for those who, you know, have known a lot about cooperatives or a certain kind of cooperative. Just digging into some of that stuff, I'm always surprised. I'm like, oh, this thing is new. Oh, this thing is new. Oh, what kind of cool stuff are these people doing? There's a lot of work being done in terms of like the detail and nuance. Also, a lot of cool projects.
Awesome, thanks. I put for folks in the room, I put the link in the chat. And then I just want to uplift someone in the chat also said, go visit a co-op. Go do, you know, your weekly shopping at a food co-op or go to a co-op cafe that's near you. And yeah, just experience it in real time. Michael, I want to take a moment and I'm going to ask everyone in the audience to take a moment to just thank you for joining us today and sharing your experience and your knowledge and your wisdom. Thank you so much. Like I said, I always love when we have co-op speakers come in. So we so appreciate you spending the time this afternoon with us.
Yes,
Well,
thank you.
Thanks for teaching about co-ops. I appreciate it. Thanks for
Awesome.
y'all's time.